My name is Jan Kovář. I was a mechanical engineer, one of those men who trusted machines more than people. At the factory by the Vltava, everything made sense. Pressure, torque, heat. Problems had solutions. When the world began to fail, it sounded like one of our old engines, a slow rattle, then silence. I thought I could fix it. I was wrong. Day one, the noise of the machines. The air in the factory was already thick before sunrise, hot, oily, metallic. We called it the iron fog. It rose from the hydraulic presses like breath from the sleeping beasts. I clocked in just as I had for 15 years, the smell of coolant and burnt steel following me like a shadow. The morning shift started with the usual rhythm, the clatter of gears, the hiss of compressed air, the steady pulse of the conveyor belts. I loved that rhythm. It was predictable, mechanical, almost comforting. You could lose yourself in it and forget the world outside the gates. I was tightening a bolt on one of the old Skoda presses when Marek, one of the younger machinists, slumped to the floor beside me. At first, I thought he'd slipped on the oil. But then I saw the tremor in his hands, the way his jaw locked and his eyes rolled back. We called for the medic. She came running from the office with her first aid kit, the red cross faded and cracked. Heat stroke, someone said. He didn't eat breakfast. But I'd never seen a man shake like that. His skin was gray, almost metallic in the harsh fluorescent light. They carried him out on a stretcher. The shift manager told us to get back to work. Machines don't stop for one sick man. By evening, I was alone in the tool room, calibrating the bearings on the cutting line. Outside, through the cracked windows, I heard sirens echoing from across the Vltava. Not the usual ambulance wail, longer, broken tones. Civil defense sirens, the kind I hadn't heard since childhood drills. The machines hummed on, steady and deafening. But beneath that industrial roar, there was something else, a distant, growing panic. That night, when I left the factory, the city smelled of smoke. Day 2, quarantine. When I arrived the next morning, the gates were locked from the outside. 2 soldiers stood by the entrance, rifles slung low, their faces hidden behind respirators. They wouldn't let anyone leave or enter. Temporary quarantine, one said. His check clipped official. There's been a chemical incident. Stay inside until further notice chemical. That word hung in the air like a gas leak. Inside the factory, the noise was quieter than usual. Management gathered us in the cafeteria, maybe 40 of us left. No one knew anything. Phones had stopped working. The radio played emergency bulletins every hour. Violent illness spreading in parts of Prague. Avoid contact with symptomatic individuals. From the 2nd floor, I watched through a broken window. Across the river, in Smíchov, I could see smoke plumes rising between the rooftops. Someone said they saw helicopters over Letna. Someone else said it was all fake, a government drill. But that night, as we stood on the upper catwalk, we saw the fires for ourselves. The city was burning in pockets, like small, deliberate wounds. The machines had been shut off by order of the foreman. The silence was unbearable. I never realized how much I depended on that mechanical heartbeat. Now, with the motors cold, you could hear everything. The dripping pipes, the echo of footsteps, the river outside, whispering against the quay. We slept in the locker room, surrounded by the ghosts of our own routines, helmets hung in rows, boots neatly lined up, as if waiting for their owners to return. Somewhere beyond the walls, Prague screamed. Day 3, the first attack. The night guard disappeared during his rounds. His flashlight was found near the boiler room, still on, its beam cutting a perfect white circle across the floor. No blood, no struggle, just gone. We split into groups to search. I took the west corridor near the assembly hall. Long shadows, half lit by flickering bulbs. The air smelled of rust and ozone. I could hear the distant creak of metal expanding as the temperature dropped. That's when I heard the pounding. Heavy, irregular, like someone slamming a wrench against the steel doors of the loading dock. I froze. The others shouted from the far end, but the noise drowned them out. Then came the screaming. 2 voices, then 1. By the time I reached them, one of the machinists, Pavel, was on the ground, thrashing, blood on his neck. Over him was another man, or what used to be one, his skin blistered, mouth black with dried blood, eyes white, empty. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a welding torch. The hiss of the gas felt like a weapon in my hands. When I pulled the trigger, the blue flame roared to life. I swung it toward the thing, and the smell of burning flesh filled the air. We dragged what was left of the infected man into the maintenance pit. The others wanted to burn him. I agreed. By dawn, we'd sealed off the eastern wing with sheet metal and welding seams. I welded the last joint myself, sparks lighting the corridor like a storm of fireflies. The others watched in silence. I realized then that my knowledge, my years of repairing dead machines, was suddenly worth something again. But I also knew what that meant. Every failure, every broken part, would now be my responsibility. That night, I wrote in my notebook, "We built walls of steel to keep out what we don't understand. But what if it's already inside?" Day 4, silence. No power. The factory finally went dark sometime before dawn. The emergency lights flickered once, then died. What was left was the slow ticking of cooling metal. I spent the morning inspecting the generator lines. Most of the cables were waterlogged. The backup diesel tank was half empty. I tried to repair a fuse box using scavenged copper wire and a screwdriver with a cracked handle. It was pointless, but it kept my hands busy. Without the hum of machines, the building felt cavernous, every sound multiplied. My own footsteps echoed like hammer blows. Somewhere, a pipe dripped steadily into a puddle. The rhythm was almost comforting, a metronome for the end of the world. I found food in the cafeteria, a few cans of beans, some instant coffee. We boiled water over a portable burner from the maintenance room. The flame sputtered, weak and uneven. There were only 5 of us left by evening. No one spoke much. The air was thick with the smell of oil and fear. I kept thinking about my wife, Clara, and our daughter, Annetta. They lived in Žižkov, across town. The phones were dead, and the roads were blocked. Every time I looked toward the river, I imagined their apartment windows glowing in the distance, or shattered, dark. Before sleeping, I walked the perimeter of the factory. The gates were twisted where someone had tried to break in. Dried blood on the metal. No bodies. The silence was worse than the noise. When machines are alive, they drown out the questions. When they die, you start to hear yourself think. Day 5, the bridge. I left before midnight. The others wanted to stay, said the factory was safe, but I couldn't stand the stillness anymore. I packed my notebook, a flashlight, a wrench, and a small canister of fuel. My boots echoed down the empty hall like the last beats of a dying engine. Outside, the air was cold, sharp with the smell of ash. The sky over Prague was an orange haze, lit by fires that refused to die. I made my way along the river, keeping close to the walls, passing warehouses and rail lines. The city that once sang with trams and chatter now whispered like a graveyard. When I reached the Palaki Bridge, I stopped. A tram was stuck midway across, its pantograph torn from the wires, its windows shattered. Smoke curled from its interior. The metal still glowed faintly red from the fire. The Vltava reflected it like molten glass. I crossed carefully, boots clanging against the rails. Every step echoed. The river below looked calm, too calm. Then I heard it, a faint tolling. Church bells somewhere upstream, slow, deliberate. Each note carried through the smoke like a heartbeat. As I reached the far side, movement caught my eye, silhouettes in the fog. Not soldiers, not survivors. They moved wrong, too fast, too erratic. One stumbled, fell, rose again. I slipped into the shadows of a tram depot, breath frozen in my throat. Inside, the smell was familiar, oil, dust, metal. It was almost comforting, like home. But the comfort didn't last long. From the darkness, a voice whispered, "Don't move." Day 6, the workshop refuge. There were 2 of them. The man was about my age, wearing a mechanic's coverall with the name David stitched on the chest. The girl, early 20s maybe, had grease on her hands and fear in her eyes. They'd been hiding in the depot since the first week, living off vending machines and rainwater. When they realized I wasn't infected, they lowered their weapons, a metal rod and a crowbar. We shared what little food we had. The girl's name was Aliska. She used to study architecture. She told me the bridges were being blown up to contain the outbreak. I didn't believe her until I heard distant explosions echoing down the river. David had been trying to repair an old tram generator to keep the lights running. He showed me his setup. Wires twisted together, a fuel line dripping into a rusted engine. It was a disaster waiting to happen. So I helped. We spent the day scavenging copper coils and battery cells from the maintenance shed. I rigged the tram's old dynamo to a makeshift flywheel, using belts from the ventilation system. When we finally started it, the machine shuddered to life. Loud, uneven, but alive. For the first time in days, there was light. It filled the depot in a pale yellow glow, illuminating the dust, the graffiti, the faces of 2 strangers who, for a brief moment, looked almost human again. We built barricades that night. Welded steel frames, layered with scrap metal. I showed them how to reinforce the doors using parts from a derailed tram. The clang of hammers echoed through the hall like distant thunder. Later, as we sat in the dim light of the generator, Aliska asked, "Do you think it will ever come back? The city? The people?" I thought of the factory, of the machines waiting in silence. "No," I said quietly, "but maybe something else will." Day 7, the last spark. I woke before dawn. The generator had died sometime during the night. Fuel line clogged. The depot was cold again, the silence heavy. I told them I needed to return to the factory. David tried to stop me, said it was suicide. But I couldn't leave it like that. The machines, the blueprints, everything I'd built. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe I just needed closure. The city was quieter than before. The fires had burned down to embers. Smoke hung low over the river. As I walked, I passed the burned tram on the bridge, now nothing but a shell. The wind whistled through its frame, making it sing a hollow tune. When I reached the factory gates, the metal I'd welded days ago was still holding. Inside, the air was cold and damp. My footsteps stirred dust from the floor. In the control room, everything was as I'd left it. The gauges dead, the panels dark. I set down the canister of fuel and began to work. It took 3 hours to restore the line. I bypassed the corroded circuits, replaced the fuse with copper wire stripped from the lighting grid, and primed the generator manually. When I pulled the lever, the machine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. One by one, the lights in the main hall flickered on, dim at first, then brighter, filling the space with a pale, industrial glow. The shadows retreated. For a moment, it was as if nothing had happened. The factory was alive again. Every pipe, every gear, every bolt breathing in rhythm. I could almost hear the voices of the workers, their laughter, the hum of 1,000 machines in harmony. I stood there, surrounded by the ghosts of my own creation, and felt both proud and hollow. Outside, the sun was rising over the river. The city was still burning, but softer now, the smoke blending with the light. I knew I couldn't stay. I took one last look at the glowing workshop, then shut the generator down. The sound faded into silence, leaving only the distant drip of water and the creak of settling metal. As I walked away, I wrote the final line in my notebook. We built these machines to last forever. We were wrong. But maybe, just maybe, they'll outlive us anyway.